Welcome back to another episode on MiniQuest 64. It's been a while, and today we talk a little bit about Turok II on the N64, and I will show you how to create a diorama based on the artwork of Turok. But first, let's talk about Turok II. The game starts with the demolition of the Acclaim logo, which was a thing back then, like in Banjo-Kazooie or Conker's Bad Fur Day, where he saw the N64 logo in pieces. At this point, I wanted to give a shout out to Daryl Mitchell, the composer of the music in the game, which has some of the best video game soundtracks I know to date. The game just had it all, from cool cutscenes to intense storytelling and mind-blowing technical aspects that were unique in its time, especially for console gaming. Just take a look at the first level. The clouds in the sky, the light effects and those flying birds that you could even shoot. Then my favorite music, the port of Aria, starts to play, and while you haven't even seen any kind of enemy, you're already surrounded by explosions and you know you're here for a good time. The enemies had some great variety, were always good for a jump scare and even took cover or ran from you depending on the situation they were in. And all of those things created a unique and intense atmosphere that couldn't be found anywhere else on the N64, a console which was widely known for its colorful and child-friendly jump and run games. Things I miss in today's shooters: a local 4-player mode. Was it all good? Nah, I also remember pretty dark areas and many situations where I just lost the orientation, especially past the third level. A Reddit post describes the feeling perfectly accurate. And a personal story for you guys: I played this game with my cousins Alex and Sergey as kids, and because we couldn't save, we had to learn this password without knowing any English. And to this day, every one of us can recall it in an instance. Here you can see the artwork which I used as reference from my diorama. As you can see, we will need 4 raptors, Turok and a pillar, so let's the hunt begin. While searching for a 32mm Turok miniature, which I haven't found, I stumbled upon Hero Forge, where you are able to design your own miniatures. They have an armor which looks like Turok's and many different weapon options and character poses, which should help to make your own Turok in any possible way. Next up, I loaded the STL file into the Prusa Slicer and cut the base of his feet. Then I right-clicked on the mini and selected Optimize Orientation, which will move our object into his best position to print. This doesn't look optimal since the back of our mini won't be visible in our diorama and we should be able to place most supports there. So I rearranged the miniature into a better position that fits our needs. For the supports, I used the Prusa Slicer auto support function and added some manual ones in critical places. This took me 10 minutes and I prepare all my minis this way. It has a success rate of 95%, and that's good enough for me. Now, this looks much better and can be exported as an STL with support structure, so we can open it later on with Chitubox. I found some real cool raptors on my mini factory from Threadhead Red. Just search for Raygun raptors and scroll down to the feral raptors. They have great fitting design and multiple options for bodies and heads. I already made a painting tutorial for these guys, so go check out my last video if you want to know more about that. Since the raptors are already pre-supported, we can drop them into Chitubox together with our Turok version. I organized them on the platform and will continue to print them on my Elegoo Mars 2 and Anycubic Grey resin in a 20-degree bathroom environment. Time to slice and have a last look on the sliced version before the printer can start. Everything looks fine, so let's save it on our USB stick, which should take 30 minutes. On the next day, everything was ready, and as you can see, I have some rough warping on the edges, which tells me I should re-level the platform. But overall, no damage has been done to the miniatures and I can use every single one of them. For the pillar, I chose a model from Loot Studios and their Buried Tomb release. Pillar number 1 will be our next model, but feel free to take any pillar you like or just craft your own one. First, we need to get the scale right, so I dropped both Turok and the pillar into the Prusa Slicer. Then I moved the pillar next to Turok and cut the bottom part since I didn't want to use it. I played a little with the scale function until the pillar had a reasonable size compared to our artwork, 200% in this case. Then I cut the top part of the pillar since I didn't want to create such a big diorama. Such a big piece would need a lot of resin, so our next step is hollowing the pillar. The Prusa hollow function is just fine for that. Check the settings and the wall thickness you would like for your hollowed object and add at least 2 holes in a non-visible area for easier post-processing. Our last step will be adding supports, so like with Turok, we select optimize orientation, but without the need to rearrange the pillar. We can go straight to the outer support function. For big objects like this, I always add a bunch of manual supports to prevent this print from failing. I always feel like Prusa doesn't count in the weight of an object and creates less supports than actually needed. Especially in big files that are unhollowed, the weight of the object can shift or break your supports and you end up with a big unfinished piece in your resin tank. You've now finished the software part and we can now move on to the painting tutorial. Here you can see our printed Turok in all his glory. I guess you could clean his back and repair some of the damage with green stuff, but since his back won't be visible at the end, I don't think it matters. An old comic will help me to choose the colors for this project. Play safe, my friend. Here you can see the colors I chose. Feel free to change them as you please. This is only a suggestion and I have a lot of colors available. I primed him with Chaos Black first and a Zenithal highlight of Corax White second. Our first color will be Gunmetal or Lead Belcher. I painted the machine gun first, 2 layers should be more than enough. Now follows a heavy wash of Nuln Oil on all the metal parts as well. After everything has dried quickly, thanks to my hairdryer, we continue with Steel or Iron Breaker. I put some paint on my makeup brush, cleaned him on a piece of MDF wood and started to dry brush the machine gun carefully while supporting the model with my fingers. To get some color variety, I used a black metallic color for various parts of the machine gun. This step is optional though. Next up is some silver or Stormhorse silver, which will be used for edge highlighting. The metal parts are now finished and we continue with the Muzzle Burn and a well-known recipe from Warhammer TV, starting with Drakenhof Nightshade. Put the wash all around the end of the gun barrel and fade it into the opposite direction. Drudgy Violet is our next color and will be placed right beside the blue wash. Don't forget to fade it into the opposite direction too. Our last color for the Muzzle Burn will be Seraphim Sepia. Just repeat the already known process. Since the Muzzle Burn is now finished, we can continue with Retributor Armor and base coat the ammunition. Next up is the contrast paint Gilliman Flesh, which will be placed all over the golden parts. Reklan Flesh Shade or Argras Earthshade would work too. Then we redefine the ammo with another layer of Retributor Armor and continue to highlight everything with Liberator Gold first and finally some silver or Stormhorse silver for the final touches. Make sure you don't use too much silver. With the ammunition finished, we move on to the Muzzle Flash and Dead White or Ceramic White. Paint as many layers as needed to give everything a pure white look and then grab some yellow contrast paint, ink or glaze like Lamentus Yellow to layer on top of that. A final dry brush of white and I'm still not satisfied. Maybe we come back later. Macrotch Blue is our next color, which will be used to base coat the jeans. After 2 thin coats, we take out our Drakenhof Nightshade, which we used previously, and wash all the blue parts. We start layering with Macrotch Blue again on the raised areas of the jeans. Since the wash was pretty dark, we should be able to create a nice contrast. Now we mix in some Fenrisian Grey into our Macrotch Blue and start adding layers to increase the contrast. While painting the layers, I make small brush strokes to get some kind of texture onto the jeans. As for the mix ratio, I used an 80:20 mix first, a 50:50 second and 20:80 mix lastly, before painting the last details with pure Fenrisian Grey. Does that look like a jeans to you? Let me know in the comments. With the jeans finished, we start painting the skin with Bugman's Glow. Man, I miss old Joseph Bugman. Every time Misha needs some attention, he pokes his wet nose into my side and leaves me with some boogers. Thanks, buddy. With the base coat done, we can now wash everything with Raygun Flash Shade. I know it's a pretty simple method, but it gets the job done pretty quickly. To apply the wash is one of the most enjoyable moments while painting minis. Maybe that's why I'm still using washes so many times when I should be just layering. Like now, again with Bugman's Glow on the raised areas. I made some extended footage for you to show you some tricky areas and how I paint them. My brush is a little bent, but I can use this to my advantage now. It took some time to get used to, but works pretty well now. Finally getting some volume on the skin. Now we mix in some Kislev flesh into our Bugman's Glow, again with a ratio of Bugman to Kislev 80:20, then 50:50 and finally 20:80, while painting less surface with each layer. The face gets our most attention, because it's the part of the miniature that people will look at first, so make sure to take your time and be as neat as possible. After many layers done, we can now use Kislev flesh in its pure form. It's up to you how many layers and color mixes you want to use, or if you just dry brush the whole skin part. But since I'm painting for a diorama and have no intention on making a bunch of Turoks for a tabletop game, this is the way I chose. Our final layer and highlights consist of a mix of Kislev flesh and Flayed One flesh on the most raised areas of the miniature. The skin is now finished and I'm pretty satisfied. Airborne Black is our next color. First we base coat the hair. If you want to simplify things, you could also paint his boots and belt black. Don't forget his eyebrows though. For the inner part of the mouth I used 2 coats of Screamer Pink and nothing else, since it's barely visible. We can now mix some dead white into our Abaddon Black to get many variations of grey and start to layer his hair and eyebrows. You could also use Mechanical Standard Grey, Administratum Grey and Ulson Grey, but I like to keep things simple and therefore just use black and white. Things would be different if I would need to paint many of this miniature, since it's hard to remix a specific shade of grey again. As always for the eyes, first a black coat, some white into it, then black again, and if you're fancy, a little dot of white as reflection. A small amount of Null Oil for the teeth. And we are done with the face. Corn red for the bandana is the next step. I also used it to reduce the size of his eyebrows, since they turned out a little too big. Then I mixed in some flat red into our corn red and created some layers and textures with brush strokes on the bandana while increasing the amount of flat red into our mix. Now he actually starts to look like Turok. After thinking about the muzzle flash again, I grabbed some Cassandra yellow and washed the whole area with it. Quite an improvement. Onto the leather parts on our first base coat with Rhinox hide, in our case both of his boots and his belt. Then I washed those parts with Null Oil, since it looked a bit too bright. I used Screaming Skull for some texture like stretches and edge highlights on the leather parts. Sadly, I actually forgot to record the previous step of stippling the leather on the most worn out areas with Doombull Brown, so do this before. If you're interested in that step, you can revisit my Warhammer Fantasy Troll or 40k Black Templar video, where I use the exact same colors, techniques and steps. Finished the leather parts. At this moment I recognized that I forgot to paint the belt loops. Therefore I grabbed Macridge Blue and Fenrisian Grey again to erase my error. Celestra Grey will be used next. We base coat the front armor with this color and then we wash the painted area with Null Oil. After everything has dried, we return with another layer of Celestra Grey to layer some coats on top, before we brighten our color by mixing in some dead white, and continue our layering process while increasing the white in our mix until we can use white on its own for some final highlights. The front armor is now finished as well. The final part of the Turok painting tutorial starts with XY88, which we use to base coat his bracelets and the front armor ribbons, which are all over the place. Since everything else on this miniature is already finished, you have to be very precise and take your time, since you don't want to destroy other parts of your almost finished miniature. Now follows a wash with Aggress Earthshade on all the parts we painted before. Almost done, but since we like layering so much, we start doing it again with some XV88. To brighten our color up, we mix in some Screaming Skull and repeat the process while painting less of the surface. Some final highlights with pure Screaming Skull. And we're done, and Turok is finished. We can now continue with our terrain piece. These are the colors we are going to use for that part. We start with a 4mm thick piece of plywood, like in our Murloc diorama. In the meantime, I have printed our pillar from Loot Studios, which will be used to get the base in shape. I wanted to make something different this time, not just a rectangle. So to increase the tension of the scenario, I decided to draw some angles and create some kind of hallway in which Turok is trapped. After some sewing, we sand the plywood down and create a fitting space for the pillar. Now I needed some stones for the base, so I took some thick XPS and my Proxon hot wire to produce two different sizes of stones, some rectangular smaller ones and some square stones of a bigger size. All of the stones went into an old ice cream container, which I emptied myself in one session before, together with some actual real stones. A good shake later and we have some nice looking textured stones for our diorama. A mix of PVA glue and water onto the base will help to keep the stones in place, while leaving us with plenty of time to arrange them. I wanted to create some kind of street and sidewalk separated through the smaller stones, where the square stones have different patterns on each side. Because of the different patterns, I had to cut some stones into fitting shapes, but overall that wasn't a huge problem because XPS is easy to cut. A final layer of heavy watered down PVA on top will reassure that everything stays in its place. Let everything dry completely before our next step, in which I cut all the stones which protrude over our base. Pretty excited, aren't we? Don't worry, that happens to the best of us. So again, more PVA on random places of our base to be covered in sand. This is also a great way to cover up any mistakes or ugly zones. After that, I added some small spots of PVA and little rocks from the dollar store. And another layer of heavy watered down PVA to hold everything in its place. The last time we use PVA, I promise. We mix some PVA, cheap black acrylic and water and paint the ground with this mixture. This will allow us to spray paint the base with a primer like Zenri dust without reacting to the XPS and melting it, like it would without this coat. That's our base after I primed it with Zenri dust. We continue with a heavy wash of Aggress Earthshade all over the place. And I really mean it, everywhere. After everything has dried, we can continue with a big dry brushing session of Zenri dust. I like to use big makeup brushes and wipe off the paint on a piece of MDF instead of a paper towel. Now, I know dry brushing is a fast technique, but this will take you 20 minutes at minimum, if done properly. So take your time and dry brush at least 4 times over everything. Then repeat the process with a softer dry brush and Ushabti bone. Now it starts to look like an ancient ruin. Another great tip from Warhammer TV is the following process. We take a little bit of Lauren Forest and add a lot of Lamian medium to create a glaze. Which will now be applied all over the ruins, cracks and stones to create some color variety. I painted 2 layers on top of each other, and I had to work very fast since the glaze dries pretty fast. I think this would also be great to put on every place where I would like tufts and plants later on. So the ruins look really good, but also a bit washed out. They are missing some kind of highlights, which will be our next step. Wraithbone or Screaming Skull are some good color choices for that purpose. I started to edge highlight all the edges and stones single-handedly. I guess I would be also possible to dry brush those, but this way should make up for a cleaner look at the end. Much better, but still not good enough. So our final highlights will be applied with dead white or any other kind of white like the Citadel ceramic white. Make sure to only use a minimum and only on the sharpest edges of your runes. Only one paint is missing. It's time to paint the rim of the base with any kind of black. And that's it for the painting part. I added all the miniatures to make it easier for the following steps, which consists of adding plants and tufts. I tend to use the stuff from Gamer's Grass, especially the tufts. They have a great quality and don't need any kind of glue. To get some variation, I added 2 different sizes and a bush from MBR models. The only thing missing now is the dust from our artwork, so I took some Vallejo pigments in a similar color and dry brushed them onto the ground, pillar and feet of our miniatures. Everything is now finished and I will shut up for a moment so you can enjoy the finished pictures. Thank you very much for watching my video. I hope to see you again on the next episode of MiniQuest 64. Have a good time.